The First Amendment is first for a reason. The founders of this country believed an unfettered press was critical to hold power accountable to the people. Journalists are actually the only professionals that have constitutional protection. I studied for exams my sophomore year listening to the Watergate hearings on a little transistor radio. And I watched two reporters, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, and their wonderful publisher, Katharine Graham, use the Washington Post as an instrument to hold the highest power accountable, the president. And I've worked for two of the greatest newspapers on earth, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, as an investigative reporter and an editor. Because of Watergate, I've always followed the money. I've dug into the nexus of money and politics for years and years. And every successive election cycle, we've all seen the amount of money involved in our politics explode to higher levels just when you think it couldn't get any worse, or big money couldn't possibly have a bigger role than it does now. It does, and this election is no exception. In general, though the internet has democratized information in many healthy ways, in terms of political journalism, the 24/7 news cycle and the thirst of the public to know information as it's happening has meant that the kind of reporting that I always did, investigative reporting, is more difficult to do. It takes a lot of time, and editors now want what I call little scooplets every hour. And the problem with scooplets is that they create, what's called buzz of the moment, but they're pretty evanescent. You don't really remember what they were, a day or so later. And so the kind of deep reporting, the great analytic pieces, or the reporters that really, went out, knocked on doors, really understood what the concerns of real people were, there's just not time anymore to do that. And I think that is one of the explanations for why the press was relatively late to the story of Donald Trump's rise, because most of the reporters who are sitting in front of these things in New York or Washington or Los Angeles don't know many Trump voters and, weren't hearing them. The media was late to Trump, and then having been late, you heard what EJ said, it's like no one can get enough. And the reason for that is sort of crass. It isn't really that the many outrageous things that Trump says are so newsworthy that every single one of them has to lead the news, but he's a ratings, magnet, and he's making a lot of money for the networks and the cable channels. So, I have mixed feelings about at least how the political press is doing so far. I really believe that journalism is a public service. When I went into journalism, although Woodward and Bernstein inspired me, I wasn't looking, to have scalps on the wall. I thought journalism was really a calling and a way to serve the public. And I very much want to see it continue to do so in this somewhat tougher environment where news organizations are sometimes more attracted by things that will get a lot of clicks, like the cliche is cats on skateboards, but it's kind of true. And I think at this point there's a little bit of soul searching going on. There have been a number of columns, including a very good one by Nick Kristof in the Times, sort of looking inward and saying, did the press help make Donald Trump what he is today? And I don't think the press can be blamed for Trump's rise, but I think they have a hand in responsibility for his rise. And I guess this election cycle, I have been one of the girls on the bus going back to 1976, which was my senior year here, and it was really back then an all-male cast of characters covering the presidential election. And, the bus is a lot more diverse now. There are many more women, especially young women, and I celebrate that trend. Even though journalism is in a period of bumpy transition, I'm always interested that so many students want to go into journalism. Not just the students have written for the Harvard Crimson, but lots of them, and my course is always oversubscribed. So interest in the profession is running very high these days.